Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go through all 15 teams there in the MLS Eastern Conference, roster moves, expectations. I'm going to rank them where I think they will finish at the end of the season 1 through 15. We're going to start from the bottom and go up to number 1. So let's jump into it. Starting at number 15, we have the Philadelphia Union. This offseason hasn't been great for them. They lost key players like Jack Elliott, Leon Flash, and with no major incoming signings or replacement, they might struggle this year. They also lost Jack McGlynn to Houston Dynamo. I think depth and defensive stability will be a big concern, and having a new staff on top of that, I just don't see them having a great season, and that's why I have them coming in at that number 15 spot. Now, coming in at that number 14th spot, I have DC United. They did bring in Leo, but it's not enough to make a major impact. They also lost some key contributor, and their squad doesn't seem ready to compete at the top level of the East. It could be another long season for DC United, and they needed to bring someone in to help with that attack with Benteke, and I just don't think they did enough, and that's why I have them coming in at that number 14 spot. Now, bringing in that number 13 spot, we have CF Montreal. They added Chinook and Jalen Neal, but they lost Joseph Martinez and a couple other players that will hurt their attack. If the new signings don't step up quickly and get acquainted quickly, they're going to struggle to keep up. I don't think that they made a lot of good signings this offseason, and I think that's why I have them coming in at that number 13 spot. Now, coming in at that 12th spot, this might be a surprise for some people. I think that they could do better. I mean, at the making of this video, I think that they could have done better signings. But coming in at that number 12 spot, I have Nashville SC. They lost McNaughton, Davis, Moore, Leo, Godoy, and Panico. It's a huge blow for them. I know that they kind of got to revamp the squad because they did not have a good season last season, but I feel like all they brought in is Tagseth, who scored 7 goals and 4 assists in 2024. It's hard to see them stay competitive. Yes, when you have Hani Mukhtar, you're going to be competitive, and maybe they will finish higher than 12th, and I think that they would finish in between that 9th and 12th spot. But for the video, at the time of this video, I'm going to have to say they finish in the number 12th spot there in the Eastern Conference. Next up in that number 11th spot, I'm going to have to go with Toronto FC. They could also move up or move down a little bit depending on Insigne and Bernardeschi. They lost Prince, but they haven't made any notable replacements, or they haven't really brought in anybody. But with those two players, they should be one of the top teams, or at least mid-table teams in MLS. But it just depends on what they do with those two players. Their attack and defense could struggle this season if Insigne does not play. If Insigne plays with Bernardeschi had a pretty good season last season, but I think that if those two can combine, then we could see them finish higher than 11th, maybe even make a playoff spot, but as of right now, I think I have them coming in at number 11. So right now, at number 10, we have the Columbus Crew. Columbus Crew, they brought in Lassie, but they lost Yeboah, Matan, and Morris, plus they lost Cucho and Ramirez, and they really haven't brought anybody else in so far for this offseason. Their midfield and attack is going to be a huge question mark. They'll need some strong performances to stay in a playoff race unless they bring someone in to replace the likes of Cucho or Ramirez. Rossi will not be able to do it all himself, so as of right now, I have to say Columbus Crew will finish 10th there in the East. Now, a big jump up from last season. Here, coming in at that number 9, I have the Chicago Fire filling in that very first playoff spot. They made some solid signings with Bamba and Barroso, but they did lose Jimenez. Could weaken their midfield with losing him. I think they'll be pushing for a playoff spot. They could end up outside of the playoffs, but as of this video, I think that Chicago are going to get the job done and make the playoffs this season. With Berhalter coming in, he's making changes. We know how everyone feels about Berhalter, but I think that he is a good coach at a club level, And I think that he could turn it around for Chicago, and that's why I have them at the number 9 spot. Now, coming in at that 8th spot, I'm going to have to put the New England Revs. They've added Jackson Ewell, Ceballos, Fofana, Capana, and Fingold, giving them some depth. However, they lost a couple of good players, and it remains to see how the new signings work together. I think Capana is a huge signing for the Revs. I think that he can do really good up top. He deserves a starting spot in MLS. I think he's a good enough striker. If they all mesh together well in this first season together, some of those players, I could even see them finishing higher than 8th. I think that the Revs will be a sleeper there in the East, but as of right now, they're in that 8th spot for me. So coming in at the number 7th spot, I'm going to go with NYCFC. They brought in Ranjasingh, but they lost Acevedo, McFarland, Sands, and Mitrovic. Their defense might be a concern, but if their attack holds up, they could be in a playoff contender, but I also seen them ending outside of the playoffs, just depending on how they perform and if they do bring in anybody else at a higher magnitude. And I know that they're making pushes there here before the season starts, but as of right now, I have them coming in at that number 7 spot. Next up, we have that number 6 spot, and I have to say it's FC Cincinnati. They bring in Evander, Anunga, and Denke is a huge plus. Denke coming off of his season with 15 goals and 7 assists there in Belgium. However, losing Kelsey, Acosta, and Giacchini means that they'll need Denke to adapt to the MLS quickly. I think that when you have someone like Evander feeding you the ball, you will have no problem and you will get into a rhythm fairly quickly. And that's why I have FC Cincinnati coming in that 6th spot and possibly could even move up into the top 5 there in the East. Now we move on to our top 5 here. And starting off in that number 5 spot, we have Charlotte FC. They've made a splash with the signing of Wilfred Zaha and Eric Williamson, but they also lost Swiderski and Capetti. Zaha, though, brings experience, but if their attack clicks, which I think that they will have one of the best attacks in the MLS with Zaha, Ajiman, Vargas, and Abada. And I could see Charlotte even being a higher seed than 5 there in the East, depending on how their defense is. I think that they do have a strong defense, but it is not at the same level as their attack. So I have to say Charlotte comes in at that number 5 spot at the end of the season. Now, coming in at that number 4 spot, we have the New York Red Bulls. They signed Bogesh and Tim Parker there for the back line. Tim Parker, I think, played phenomenal for St. Louis, not so much for the Revs. So if he can bring back that form that he played at there in St. Louis, I think he can very much help the Red Bulls there on the back line. They did lose Van Zier, Tolkien, Reyes, Manuel, and Berkey, which is a lot to handle. That's a lot of players lost, but I'm a little worried about their defense, other than I think Tim Parker can fill in where Reyes is leaving. You still have both Nealis brothers, and it should be okay. And with the attack, having Forsberg and Lewis Morgan up there, up top, I think that they should be able to perform just as well as they did last year, maybe even a little bit better. But I could see them even finishing in the top 3. But for now, we'll have them coming in at that number 4 spot. Now, for this 3rd spot, we all had a lot of high hopes for this team, and they didn't turn it on until the second half of the season, and that is Orlando City. They brought in Rodriguez and Brusith. They did, however, lose Torres. The Torres loss is huge, but their squad depth should keep them in contention for the top spots there in the East, as long as they continue to play like they did at the end of last season. They played like a team we thought they would. If they can, for the whole season, they will be one of the best there in the East. And I could even see them coming in that 2nd spot, but maybe even dropping down to that 4th spot. Just depends on how they play. But for now, they're in that 3rd spot. So coming in at that number 2 spot, I have Atlanta United. Yes, it might be a bias, but I think that they have the players to do it, to compete with a team like Miami. Don't think they're going to be better than Miami, but I think that they've brought in players to compete. The return of Miguel Almiron is massive. And then they also make one of the, I think, the record signing of Lotte Loth coming in there for the striker. Having these two replacing Almada and Gigi can be a really great thing. I'm worried about our defense and with all the injuries there on the back and the inconsistency. But if Almiron, Moranchuk, Saba, and Loth work well together up top, they'll be the most dangerous attack in the MLS and could compete with Miami in the East. But I just think Miami are going to be a lot better than everybody. They have the depth. They brought in a lot of good signings. But I have to say Atlanta will be in the top 5. And for this video, I think that they will finish in that number 2 spot in the East. And last but not least, we have that number 1 spot there in the East. And I think everybody will agree with me that it will be Inter Miami. They brought in Picoult, Velasco, Gonzalo, Luan, Novo, Falcone, and Allende. Even though Farsi and Gomez are gone, this team is still stacked with Messi, Suarez, and their new signings. Miami looks like a clear favorite again to be dominant in the East this season. I also believe they will perform just as good, if not better, than what they did last season, which is kind of hard to believe. They won't miss out on Messi leaving for any kind of national team things, and if he stays healthy, they're going to be the best there in the East and probably win the Supporters' Shield again. And that's why I have them coming in at number 1 there in the East. So that is it for my rankings there in the MLS Eastern Conference. Tell me what your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you for the next video.